Police officers past and present have been part of the conversation since the recent spate of shootings on both civilians and cops. For many, the questions about the relationship between the police and the public they serve have been questions long-standing. Norm Stamper was chief of the Seattle Police Department for 6 years. His latest text is on the very issue. It's called "To Protect and Serve: How to Fix America's Police." Before we start our conversation, I want to play first a clip from the chief's visit on this program back in 2005. I think once you hear it, you'll see why I wanted you to see it. Take a look. I am out of time, but certainly for those African Americans who have been waiting for someone in this country to talk boldly about the issues of racism inside police forces, certainly not all, but it is a real issue. Let me just read right quick one line in this book. I know you'll want to get it after you hear this. Chapter 8. Chapter 8 is called "Why White Cops Kill Black Men." I read and I quote, "Simply put, white cops are afraid of black men. We don't talk about it. We pretend it doesn't exist. We claim color blindness. We say white officials treat black men the same way they treat white men. But that's a lie." That's the kind of stuff, the kind of forthright conversation you get on all sorts of issues, not just race, but all sorts of issues. In the new book written by the former police chief of Seattle, Norm Stamper, the book is called "Breaking Rank: A Top Cop's Expose of the Dark Side of American Policing." I highly recommend it. Mr. Stamper, nice to meet you, sir.
Thank you.
That's how we closed our show the last time I saw you on this set back in 2005. When I saw that clip, saw the transcript first, it was eerie for me when Kim, my producer, showed that to me, because it just, I think for some fellow citizens, feels like we've never been here before, and this feels like there's an urgency now to these issues. And here we were in 2005 talking about this very same issue on a prior book. What do you make of then, now, then? Tell me something.
Well, my reaction to it was, we'll be doing the same kind of a conversation 5, 10, 15 years in the future unless we decide as a people to make a fundamental change, to reinvent police work in the United States.
President Obama had a task force called 21st Century Policing. What do you make of what they have done or not done, say it or not say it, as it were?
I read it. I liked it. There wasn't a recommendation of any note that I could disagree with. My problem with it is that it didn't attack the root causes of the racial discrimination, the excessive force, the occasional trigger happiness of police officers, which are all addressable, but it takes some courage and it takes a lot of hard work.
Let's go there, since you raised it. What are we not doing that we ought to be doing? Typically in these conversations, you get to the solutions at the end. Since you raised it now, let's talk about solutions now. What are we not doing?
Well, one thing we're not doing is setting national standards for police work. If you're a police officer in Ferguson or in New York, you're going to be held accountable, to the extent that you're held accountable at all, to your own agency. You're not going to be held accountable to what we might loosely call the profession. So whether it comes to stop and frisk or force, including lethal force, rules of arrest, search and seizure, all these procedural justice issues that have so much to do, not just with crime fighting, obviously, but with the community police relationship. Until we get to the point where we set a reasonable job-related, non-discriminatory standards for police work, we'll be back here having this same conversation.
I was reading a study just this morning by Michigan State University that found that police officers who have bachelor's degrees find themselves far less often engaged in excessive force cases. It's not to suggest that education is the answer to everything, or that a bachelor's degree is the end-all be-all, but I think it does open the door to a conversation I want to have now about whether or not we don't have as educated a force as we should have, number one. Whether or not when you go to college you get exposed to different races, you have a different, more expanded, I think, worldview, versus being an 18-year-old kid that finishes high school, goes straight to Iraq or Afghanistan, comes back, gets a job in a police department where he's already been trained to be a militiaman, if you will, and come back and treat citizens differently, in part because you've been in a faraway land taking aim at people of color with a weapon in your hands. I'm just trying to figure out whether or not you think there's anything to this study and having officers with a greater worldview.
Well, the short answer would be yes, of course I do. I think if nothing else, regardless of what you're studying, but particularly the liberal arts, you're going to come away with some critical thinking faculties. You're going to come away with the kind of discipline that's necessary to make it through an academic program. So there's value in that. There's no question about it. And it's also important to point out that there are a lot of police officers without advanced or higher education who do a very good job. They're sensitive, they're compassionate, they're empathetic. If they're racist, it sure doesn't show. They actually present themselves very effectively. So we need to keep that in mind as well. But here's what we did in San Diego many, many years ago. I was the strongest advocate for exactly what you're talking about. I said, if we have to start incrementally, let's impose a 60 unit a requirement at entry level. We did that. Convinced the civil service to go along with remaking the rules. Within a very short period of time, we saw our African American and Latino candidates going into other fields with their higher education. In other words, they were not coming to the local police department. That speaks to the much larger issue of the image of police and the relationship between police and community, and particularly communities of color.
Yeah. The police chief in Dallas, who I think has been awfully adroit and adept at the way he's handled this case. I think the country appreciates how the Dallas police chief has handled this incident and the days since. He made a statement just recently that they have openings in the Dallas Police Department. And he suggested to protesters and to others, if you want to protect and you want to serve and you think we can do a better job, and he was being very honest and earnest about it, apply. Why not be a Dallas police officer? What do you make of those kinds of appeals? And what beyond that appeal can we do to get more people of color to want to serve in police forces? Is that part of the answer?
It is, I think, part of the answer, and I certainly echo what you're saying about the police chief's performance over these last several days. I think he's just been an extraordinary leader, and it's good to see that. It's very encouraging. At the same time, extending an invitation to people within the community who have a mistrustful, if not distrustful, relationship of the local police department, people are not going to be answering that call. They just won't, because they can't. They can't see themselves as part of an oppressive force, an occupational force within the community. Great strides have been made in Dallas and in a few other police departments as well. Those need to be recognized. They need to be celebrated. Nobody needs to be resting on his or her laurels, however, at this point. But for the vast majority of police departments in the country, there's a reason for that mistrust. And we've got to dig deep, identify what those reasons are, and then systematically do the heavy lifting that is necessary to build trust between community and police.
If I've heard one word come out of the mouth of every law enforcement person that I've seen interviewed over the last few days since these horrific shootings, that one word is compliance, compliance, compliance. Are they right about that? Is that the real problem here, that when black men and others get pulled over, that we are not compliant?
Black men, every man, every woman in this country has a right to walk down the street or drive down the street, and absent some legal justification for the stop, go on their way without fear of being discriminated against by their local police department. Sadly, there are 18,000 police departments in this country, but only one Constitution. And that Constitution is binding on all roughly 1 million law enforcement officers in the United States. And yet we see systemic abuse of that Constitution. We have some wonderful police officers, and they are truly dedicated to building positive relations within the community, fighting crime, assuring public safety, safeguarding civil liberties. These police officers, however, are generally successful in spite of the system, not because of it. So my advocacy centers around this notion that we need to set standards for every agency and every officer in the country. We need to certify every officer as a professional. If you can or won't meet these standards for stop and frisk, for use of force, including lethal force, find another job. And if you are certified and then you misbehave, and sometimes criminally, guess what? You can't get fired from agency A and get picked up the next day by agency B. If you set national standards for performance and conduct for every cop in the country, you know, my fellow officers, my former colleagues would say, what about home rule and what about states' rights? And I say, well, what about the Constitution? This is not about federalizing law enforcement. It's about saying that the work that every cop from Ferguson to NYPD does is sensitive and delicate and demanding, and God knows from what we have seen for many, many years, but certainly in this past week alone, it really is the kind of work that just cries out for standards.
You mentioned the 18,000 different police forces that exist in this country. I think I caught former Philadelphia Police Chief Charles Ramsey on a show the other day. Ramsey was tapped by President Obama to be the head of this 21st Century Police Blue Ribbon Committee, if you will. And I think I heard Chief Ramsey suggest that there are too many police forces in this country, and his argument was that we ought to cut that number in half. And the point was that when you have 18,000 departments, you got 18,000 different ways of doing it. Right. Given what you've just said now, is he onto something that we need to literally cut in half the number of police forces, departments that is, in this country?
I wouldn't start with a specific figure, but he is definitely onto something. If an agency is systematically abusing the citizens that agency is here to protect and serve, then that agency probably ought to go out of business. If you read the Ferguson report, there were no surprises to me simply because I've been around for a while. But it was nonetheless very, very disturbing to see the extent to which pretty much the entire city government was implicated in systematic violations of their citizens' constitutional liberties. Take the crushing poverty of most of the people in that city. Take the disproportionate numbers of African Americans who are being stopped and cited and arrested and prosecuted and the like. And what you get is a picture of true systemic discrimination. I don't care if somebody says, I don't have a racist bone in my body. Number one, I'm inclined to disbelieve that. But let's say that that's really true. If the behavior, a quota system, for example, that sort of reinforces how you guide and direct cops, and certainly how you evaluate their performance and decide how you're going to promote them. I speak from personal experience because I'm a beneficiary of that system. When I was a rookie cop, the sergeant said, get 2 of these and 5 of those and 3 of those a day. I'll go out and double those numbers, if not triple them. And I'll find a seat in detectives, or I'll start stitching, sergeant stripes onto my sleeve, or pinning lieutenants and captains' bars onto my collars. That's got to stop, and it's widespread. So I think there are some police departments that have no business operating as a law enforcement agency, and they ought to go out of business. And we ought to be looking at, and Chuck is a friend and a colleague, and I've talked to him about this, and he says exactly what you have just quoted him saying. We have too many police forces in this country. Too many police forces and not enough standard.
I've been looking at, and was talking about this earlier today, the pay for cops. It's almost impossible to be a cop in New York City and be able to live in the city, because you can't afford to live in the city. Right. So you're protecting and serving. I say all the time that the best of us are those who serve the rest of us.
Yes.
So I put cops in that category. Yeah. But if you can't make a decent living, I wonder what that says then about the pool of people that we're choosing from to be cops. It's like it's the inverse of, or the same thing when it comes to running for president. I mean, we hate the candidates that we have, but when you look at what you have to go through to be elected president, a lot of good people don't want to put themselves in that cesspool to try to get to the Oval Office. I wonder whether or not salary, compensation has anything to do with the pool of people we're choosing from in the first place.
Well, it certainly does. Yeah. If Job A pays $25,000 and Job B pays $53,000, guess where people are going to be congregating? And particularly if the entry-level requirements are similar, that sort of thing. So yeah, pay and other fringe benefits and certainly working conditions, mostly associated with police union contracts and so forth. All that stuff's important. But ultimately, it pales by comparison to self-pride. It pales in comparison to job satisfaction and morale. I would much rather be doing work that fulfills me, satisfies me, brings me joy and pleasure, whatever sacrifices I have to make, whatever occasional tough decisions I have to make. I'd much rather be doing that kind of a job than getting a few bucks a year extra.
What say you, Chief, about the palpable fear that many white cops have when they come in contact with black fellow citizens? When you look at this videotape, as we all have,
Yes.
particularly the videotape of the killing of Mr. Castile in Minnesota, this cop is almost having a meltdown. I mean, the guy is in the front seat dead. He's screaming and yelling like he's about to lose his mind. I told him to keep his hands up. I told him to keep it. I mean, he's losing his mind at that moment. I could see and on his face and hear in his voice, again, this palpable fear that he had of the situation. How do you police when you're that afraid of everything or everybody, or certainly certain people?
Well, you don't.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't. I mean, is there anybody out there who is not aware of the fact that the police officer, Timothy Lohman by name, who shot and killed a lonely 12-year-old boy on a snowfield in Cleveland, was fired by his previous agency? And it's like 19 minutes away from the Cleveland, Ohio Police Department. Some HR person makes a phone call. That's good. That's not nearly enough to constitute a background investigation. Who'd they hire? They hired a guy who was weeping himself to sleep every night for months during his police academy because of a personal, emotional experience that he was having. Do we really want to pin a badge on that guy's chest and allow him to strap on a firearm and go out there and protect and serve? I think it's vital that we ensure for the psychological resilience and the emotional hardiness that is necessary to perform this enormously difficult job of being a cop.
Are we missing that? Are we missing that mark? And if so, how bad are we missing the mark when it comes to the psychological profile of the persons we give these badges to?
We're generally stopping at the door those that want to eat raw meat and hit people. I mean, people say, well, you know, psychological screening. Do more psychological screening, we'll solve this problem. That's total nonsense. It really is. Over the years, although we're far from perfect as an institution, we have developed screening mechanisms that allow us not so much to screen in the best of the best, but to screen out the worst of the worst. So that's cool. We're doing a much better job of entry-level screening. That's not the issue. The issue, I'm convinced, is what happens to these candidates, maybe with high ideals, who, like me, decided, I'm never going to use the N-word as a cop. I'm going to treat people with dignity and respect. I won't write them bad tickets. I'm going to be a responsible police officer. For me, that lasted about 5 minutes. I got sucked into the culture, and while there were good cops all around me, I didn't sort of gravitate toward them. And maybe I need to be psychologically re-screened to understand why that is the case. In fact, I'll share with you a little 25 cents worth of psychology.
Yeah.
I came from an unhealthy family. My father was physically and emotionally abusive. He told me pretty much every day of my life that I was a worthless human being. And he punctuated this emotional abuse with physical abuse. So I told myself as I'm growing up, I'm going to be as different from you as I can possibly be. Well, beware those of us who are glibly, sort of accepting that truth. He was the foremost male authority figure in my life. So what he's saying, it's got to have some truth to it. I am worthless. I'm this. I'm that. Then I become a cop, and by God, now I got a family, and the work. It's just fascinating work, and it's an adventure. Beware of anybody who treats police work as an adventure. But for me, it was an adventure, and I will openly confess that I gravitated toward those officers who were abusive of the citizens they've been hired to serve, and enjoyed it. And I will also confess that I now have a cellular memory of what it means to have that kind of power.
The question is, how did you get out of that?
A principled prosecutor slapped me upside the head, asked me if the Constitution of the United States meant anything to me. I was livid when he said that. You know, this is a guy in a pinstripe suit and tortoiseshell glasses and slick back Hollywood haircut, and he asked me about the circumstances of an arrest I'd made, which, by the way, was a false arrest. And I said, you know, well, the individual said this and said that, and furthermore, he called me a pig. And this guy looked at me and asked if the Constitution meant anything to me. He says, I'm going to dismiss this case today, but I better never see you back in this courthouse under these circumstances again. And I was mad. I was really angry. Who are you, to prowl the hallways of the safe county courthouse and go to your office and consult your textbooks and your colleagues down the hall when I'm out there on the mean streets in the cold and the heat, San Diego. Yeah. I'm out there doing police work, Yeah. The nerve of this guy. Yeah. And I really felt angry. Later I would learn, and I still believe, that behind all anger is fear. He had busted me. And it's like, wait a minute, what happened to my good intentions some 6, 8, 10, 14 months back? What happened to this kind of cop I was going to be? Because I certainly didn't turn into that kind of cop. So I now know what it is like to be given a pretty heady amount of power over other human beings at age 21. And it's not a pretty picture. We need to understand that.
Thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
Let me close our conversation where your book begins, which was fascinating for me, this reimagining of a conversation between Michael Brown and Ferguson and the cop who killed him.
Yes.
Tell me tell me what you did and why you did it.
I think it's important for all of us, police officers, citizen alike, and it's especially important for people who historically have been most abused or neglected or oppressed by their own local police officers. It's important for all of us to understand that if we can find the will and the courage to learn how to treat one another with dignity and respect. It's not enough for a chief to speak from on high or for policies to be codified to say, you're going to treat people with dignity and respect. It's hard work if you haven't done that. And maybe in some cases, some of our more senior officers for many, many years, if not decades. But for the officers to understand the decades-long perception of so many people in economically disadvantaged communities, the generation after generation after generation of dads and moms who have to talk with their 4-year-old or 8-year or 14-year-old boys especially, but also girls, to really understand how the Michael Brown drama could have played out differently. And so I wrote it. I wrote it aspirationally and retrospectively. I wanted it to play out the way it could have and the way it should have. I wanted Darren Wilson to be a sensitive, compassionate, competent police officer who knows his job, is not afraid to take enforcement action. He's there to help achieve public safety, but who would actually partner with this 18-year-old walking down the street. So that's why I opened the book with that story.
It is a powerful story. His reimagining of how that conversation ought to have gone, might have gone, perhaps should have gone, but did not, and Michael Brown is dead. And that's just the start of the book. It's a wonderful read and could not be more timely in its publication. The book is called To Protect and Serve, How to Fix America's Police by Norm Stamper, also the author of Breaking Rank and former chief of police in the city of Seattle. Mr. Stamper, good to have you back on, sir.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
I hope we won't be back here 10 years having this conversation.
I hope we can be here to celebrate some successes.
I hope so as well. That's our show tonight. Thanks for watching, and as always, keep the faith.
The better the cop you are, in the eyes of the system. Once you made probation, your performance evaluations were essentially reduced to activity recaps, a summary of the numbers you harvested over a given period of time. The numbers game shaped us as police officers. Indeed, it defined us as police officers. As I observe in my current consulting training and expert witness work, and note in federal investigations into police departments like Ferguson, there is abundant evidence that the numbers game survives to this day. In fact, many supervisors believe that counting and recapping activity is the only way to evaluate police performance. At no time did a boss ever question or counsel me as a rookie cop about the conditions on my beat. How many burglaries, robberies, rapes, auto thefts, car prowls, assaults, or vehicle accidents, injuries, fatalities, hit and runs had taken place in my assigned geographical area of the city while I was on duty? When and where were these incidents taking place? Were there more of them this year than last year? This week over last week? And what of the nature of these incidents? Of course, behind every crime statistic was a victim and a suspect or suspects. People hurting other people, frightening them, affecting their quality of life, their property values, the safety and welfare of their children. And nowhere was this more heartbreaking than in economically disadvantaged neighborhoods. How was I going about collecting my numbers? How was I treating people? Didn't matter. There was zero assessment of the quality of my relations with the citizens I'd been hired to protect and serve. The people on my beat were, in a word, irrelevant. As long as I stopped enough of them, handed them enough tickets, arrested enough of them, I would at a minimum keep the sergeant off my back, and optimally get him, there were no hers at the time, in any of the supervisory, much less managerial or executive ranks, or for that matter, in uniform, to support my aspirational career track. Of course, it was understood that a productive beat cop would generate heat from time to time. A citizen's complaint or two during a particular raiding period, no cause for concern, possibly even justification for praise. It showed I was out there working, being productive, being a cop. Which brings us to Ferguson. Anyone who wants to understand just how bad policing can get, and how it can get that bad, must read the March 4, 2015 Department of Justice DOJ report on the Ferguson Police Department, FPD. The 102-page document is a searing indictment of a Midwest police agency whose cops, aided and abetted by their chief of police, the city prosecutor, the municipal court judge, the court clerk, and virtually every elected official in town, systematically violated the constitutional rights of its citizens, and did so in the most blatant, public, unapologetic way imaginable. It was almost as if they didn't know any better, a theory worth pursuing. Justice Department investigators, acting under authority of the pattern or practice provision of the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, the Omnibus Crime Control and Safe Streets Act of 1968, and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, conducted a thorough investigation. As noted in the DOJ report, investigators interviewed the city manager, mayor, police chief, municipal court judge, municipal court clerk, finance director, and half of FPD's sworn officers and others. They went on ride-alongs with the cops, reviewed 35,000 pages of police records, as well as thousands of emails and other electronic materials provided by the police department. They put statistical experts to work on FPD's stops, searches, citations, and arrests, as well as data collected by the municipal court. They did some court watching, and they interviewed dozens of defendants. They examined previous independent studies of court practices in both Ferguson and St. Louis County, and they sought to engage the local community, conducting hundreds of in-person and telephone interviews of individuals who reside in Ferguson or who have had interactions with the police department. They spoke with neighborhood associations, other community groups, and advocacy organizations. Finally, they brought along 2 outside police chiefs who reviewed FPD's policies and incident reports and conducted their own interviews. What they found confirmed a pattern or practice of unlawful